Welcome to the deep dive. It's great to have you with us today.
Yeah, glad to be here. We've got a really massive stack of sources to go through today.
We really do. And honestly, the timing on this couldn't be more relevant. We are looking at, well, international defense procurement research. Specifically, there's a massive new report from CBI.
Right, that's the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we're pairing that report with a series of structural analytical logs that we use to track, underlying system changes.
The MGF-43 and the mini-fields LMOS.
Yeah, right, the MOS logs. And finally, we're cross-referencing all of this with the breaking news from early March 2026 regarding some really unprecedented AI defense contracts.
It is a totally dense stack of material. But, I mean, when you put these pieces together, it reveals this fundamental shift in how governments are operating behind closed doors. We're looking at the raw structural physics of how a nation-state buys a machine brain.
Yeah. And to set the stage for you, these sources don't just exist in a vacuum. They actually contain briefings on real-time geopolitical crises.
The pressure cooker, basically.
Right. Right now, we're looking at ongoing conflicts involving Iran and Israel, the blocking of the Strait of Hormuz, and renewed clashes between Pakistan and the Taliban in Afghanistan.
And we should probably...
Yeah, to be absolutely clear up front, we remain strictly impartial here. We do not endorse any political viewpoints, and we don't take sides in these conflicts.
Right, zero macro authority positioning from us. No geographic framing statements either.
Exactly. We are referencing this intense global backdrop purely to highlight the real-world pressure. These acute, immediate crises are the exact pressures driving militaries around the world to acquire new technologies, like AI, as rapidly as possible.
The geopolitical reality is the engine. When the Strait of Hormuz is blocked or drones are active over Israel and Pakistan, defense departments don't have the luxury of purely theoretical tech debates. They have an immediate operational need.
Yeah, they need solutions yesterday. And that brings us to the mission of this channel. We provide structural readings of global events.
Because this channel functions as an ongoing analytical training log.
Exactly. The goal is that over time, repeated listening will help sharpen your structural lens. We're just looking at the mechanics beneath the headlines. So let's get right to it. Here is our provisional thesis for today.
Let's lay it out.
Provisional thesis. When AI becomes contractually embedded within national security structures, the first acceleration does not occur in compute competition, it occurs in audit design competition.
That thesis is the core of everything we are discussing today.
And why this matters to you right now is that contractual formalization changes operational requirements immediately.
Right.
Once AI enters national security contracts, things like logging, traceability, and verification become structural constraints. They aren't optional features you can patch in later. They are mandatory from day one.
And to really understand how this works, we need to explicitly state the analytical lens we are applying to these sources.
Go for it.
It's a three-part framework. First, policy formalization times system design. Second, velocity mismatch times audit architecture. And third, incentive shift times institutional absorption.
I know that sounds like a mouthful of equations,
It really does.
but we're going to break down exactly what those mean in the real world.
Okay, let's unpack this. We'll look at this through three layers.
Let's start with the narrative of what actually just happens, the event layer. There was a massive tectonic shift just days ago. On the exact same day that the Trump administration ordered a halt on using Anthropic's AI in all federal agencies, OpenAI swooped in and signed a deal with the U.S. Department of War.
Formerly the Pentagon.
Right, to deploy their models directly onto classified military networks.
It's the juxtaposition of those two events happening simultaneously that makes this a structural pivot rather than just a dramatic news cycle. It shows a highly specific selection process playing out in real time.
Let's look at the impartial context of that fallout. Because the political friction was intense, Anthropic basically drew a line in the sand. They refused to lift their safety guardrails regarding mass domestic surveillance, and they refused to allow their models to be used in the development of fully autonomous weapons.
Yeah.
In response to that refusal, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth publicly labeled Anthropic a supply chain risk. The president went on to call them a woke company and directed federal agencies to completely cease business with them. And then, right on cue, OpenAI steps into the void.
What's fascinating here is the groundwork OpenAI laid to be in that position. If you look back, OpenAI quietly altered its terms of service in early 2024, dropping a blanket ban on military use.
Oh, right.
They also added former NSA Director General Paul Nakasone to their board. They positioned themselves institutionally to be ready for this exact kind of procurement moment.
But, and this is a crucial pivot in the sources, OpenAI didn't just hand over a flash drive with their smartest model and walk away. Their deal actually codifies safety principles into contractual form.
This is where it gets real.
Yeah. The contract explicitly prohibits the U.S. military from using the AI for domestic mass surveillance. It prohibits social credit systems, and it mandates strict human control over the use of force, meaning no fully autonomous Terminator robots.
Right.
To enforce this, OpenAI is using what they call a layered security stack.
That security stack is where the theory hits reality. OpenAI is deploying their own cleared personnel, they call them frontier deployment engineers, directly into these classified cloud networks.
I want to pause on that because what does a frontier deployment engineer actually do on a classified server?
It's a good question.
To give you a grounded example, once these safety principles are locked into a defense contract, the software itself has to technically prove it's following the rules. Suddenly you need inference logging, which is basically a hyper-detailed receipt of every single digital thought or process the AI just had.
Yeah, a massive paper trail.
You need strict model version control, constraint verification, and constant real-time documentation of safety alignment.
Exactly. If the contract says the AI cannot target civilians, the engineers have to build a mathematical proof. A log showing that the AI's targeting algorithm has constraints actively preventing that.
Wow.
Which brings us right back to our thesis. The formalization of these contracts shifts the immediate pressure away from raw performance, like how fast or smart the AI is, and directly onto accountability design.
Right, the audit layer.
And we need to clarify the time horizon here. We are not talking about a 10-year Pentagon roadmap. This is a short-term structural shift happening right now in a matter of weeks to months.
Now let's move to the structural layer.
Yeah.
Because this is where the incentives completely flip.
At this institutional level, we see a massive incentive shift. Because governments require auditability by law, companies are forced to operationalize explainability.
Yeah.
Compliance isn't just a legal checkbox anymore. Compliance becomes the actual architecture of the software.
The Cypre report details exactly why this is causing so much friction inside the military. Traditional military procurement is what they call a waterfall model. It's like trying to build a battleship. You assess your requirements, you solicit bids, you evaluate, you sign a contract, and maybe 10 years later, a finished piece of hardware rolls out of a shipyard.
You can't just change the blueprints halfway through.
Right. But buying an AI is like subscribing to an organism that learns and changes every week. It requires continuous, iterative, spiral development. The models update, the data changes. How do you write a 10-year contract for that?
You can't. Which creates a massive immediate need for what the military calls TEVV.
Which stands for?
Testing, evaluation, validation, and verification. This connects back to that velocity mismatch we mentioned in the analytical lens earlier. The speed of the technology is entirely mismatched with the speed of the bureaucracy.
And to solve that mismatch, the sources talk about the need for gradient visibility, which is essentially a fancy way of saying the military needs to be able to see inside the AI's black box. They need to see the gradients, the math, the exact pathways the AI took to arrive at a tactical recommendation.
While raw compute power, having the biggest server farms and the most GPUs, remains a massive strategic priority, the design of the audit system becomes the urgent priority.
The urgent priority.
Yes. A system cannot simply be powerful. It must be reviewable. If you can't test it, evaluate it, and verify it under these new strict contracts, it is illegal to field it.
And the public is incredibly sensitive to this. There was a massive backlash reported by TechRadar just after the OpenAI deal was announced. Users were literally canceling their ChatGPT subscriptions in droves.
I remember seeing that.
They were deeply alarmed by the vague, all lawful purposes language used in the initial defense deal statements. Add to that the sharp criticisms from figures like Edward Snowden regarding the hiring of the former NSA director, and you see what our structural logs call the fear gradient.
The fear gradient is a powerful structural force. The public is demanding a paper trail because they fundamentally fear the implications of a black box intelligence operating within a military command structure.
Of course they do.
That fear forces institutions to act defensively. The slope moves toward audit capability before raw compute scaling. You have to build the mechanism to explain the AI before you are allowed to scale up its analytical power.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's look at the timelines using gradient framing, avoiding any concrete predictions, but looking at the actual direction of the pressure.
Short term, pressure accumulates in compliance systems. The frameworks for how we even specify an audit are expanding rapidly.
Okay, so that's short term.
Medium term, this reshapes procurement standards across allied institutional blocks. If the U.S. requires inference logging, eventually NATO allies will require it too.
Makes sense.
Long term, sovereignty definitions may abstract toward audit control, meaning a nation's power isn't just defined by its weapons, but by its cryptographic ability to audit the machine intelligence running those weapons.
If we look at the MGF-43 logs, they point out a really fascinating disconnect. The surface narrative, the daily lives of regular citizens, is relatively quiet regarding this specific AI shift. But the OS layer of society is rapidly formalizing. The foundational rules of how machine intelligence interacts with state power are being written into procurement contracts as we speak.
We have to move beyond the headline of OpenAI gets a military contract. If you connect the dots between the AI firms, the defense procurement laws, the regulatory frameworks, institutional trust, and research culture, a key structural tension emerges.
Right, the battle of optimization competition versus audit competition.
Exactly.
Let's break those two down. Optimization drives capability. We see this vividly in the geopolitical sources. Look at Ukraine. They rapidly deployed attritable autonomous drones via their Brave One platform to counter electronic warfare.
Yeah, that was a huge shift.
They needed cheap, smart drones that could fly themselves when the radio signals were jammed. Or look at the U.S. Replicator Initiative, which aims to field thousands of autonomous systems in just 18 to 24 months. That is optimization. Getting the tech to the battlefield as fast as possible to gain a lethal edge.
But on the other side of the tension, audit drives legitimacy. The SciPri report highlights international frameworks like API Article 36. This is a rule that requires states to conduct international legal reviews to prove that any new weapon or means of warfare can actually be used in compliance with international humanitarian law.
Wow, yeah. How do you prove a drone running a neural network will follow the Geneva Conventions?
You audit it.
Exactly. Both are necessary. You need optimization to survive a conflict, and you need auditability to maintain your legal and institutional legitimacy on the world stage.
But here's the crux. Only one of those becomes immediately non-optional the second it is contractualized. You can promise the Pentagon a future software update for better drone performance, but you cannot legally deploy the system tomorrow if the contract mandates inference logging and you haven't built the logging architecture yet.
So it all comes back to that core idea. Audit acceleration precedes compute acceleration in institutional environments. The military might desperately want the smartest AI on the market, but what they are actually legally forced to buy first is the system that can prove a negative. Prove it isn't breaking the law.
There is structural pressure here, yet visible societal change remains limited.
It's so true. You read about these massive defense contracts, autonomous weapons initiatives, and global blockades, and it sounds like science fiction. But you walk outside, and day-to-day life hasn't fundamentally changed for most people. There's a tremendous amount of friction between formalizing a contract, selecting a tech company, and actually embedding that technology into a giant, slow-moving bureaucratic institution.
We have to explain that inertia. Why isn't daily life changing yet? The MGF-43 logs identify a few key absorption mechanisms happening right now. First, there's political non-agenda status.
Right.
This is highly technical procurement law. It involves cloud architecture and API logging. That doesn't easily translate to fiery, everyday political discourse, so it stays out of the mainstream spotlight.
Second is bureaucratic internalization. All of this friction we are talking about, it's happening inside highly secure facilities, behind closed doors, in arguments between defense lawyers and software engineers. It's not happening in the public square.
Third is distributed institutional stress. The massive burden of compliance is being spread out across multiple agencies, subcommittees, and private contractors, which diffuses the visible impact.
Yeah.
And finally, there is just cultural inertia around AI normalization. Society as a whole is still just getting used to chatbots helping them write emails, let alone grappling with military command and control AI.
So all this pressure is just building up inside the plumbing of the state.
Yes, and I must explicitly clarify, stability is not equilibrium. Just because the surface of the water looks calm to the average citizen does not mean the underlying structural currents aren't experiencing immense shear stress.
To position the current state for you, we are in a likely absorption phase. The immense pressure of integrating AI into national security is accumulating inside these institutions rather than expressing itself socially.
Yeah.
And remember, as we look at this, we are offering no prescriptions and advocating no escalation. We are strictly observing the structural physics of how a government absorbs a new paradigm.
The physics dictate that the containment vessel, the audit layer, has to be constructed and verified before the reactor can be turned on.
So what does this all mean? If we distill everything we've talked about today into a single compression sentence, national integration of AI is accelerating audit architecture before compute dominance.
And if we map the directional gradient of where this is heading, the structural slope currently leans toward institutional audit formalization.
Which leaves you with a massive forward-looking question to consider. Will audit design become a competitive sovereign asset or remain a secondary compliance layer beneath compute competition?
Our one-sentence takeaway for you today is this. Contractual integration of AI shifts immediate pressure toward audit design rather than raw computational scale.
And if audit architecture truly becomes foundational to institutional legitimacy, who ultimately defines its standards? States, firms, or alliances?
I'll leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over on your own. If the speed of AI deployment, this massive spiral development, completely outpaces a nation's ability to hire human auditors who actually understand the underlying code,
Which is happening.
right, does the audit layer eventually have to be outsourced to another AI? And if so, who audits the auditor?
What a question to end on. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We hope this structural reading has given you a sharper lens for the news you see this week. Keep analyzing, keep questioning the structures around you, and we will catch you next time.